some quick responses, folks. You would have a questions or a chat window in front of you. Thank you, Disha. Can I have some yes? If you guys can see my screen and hear me loud and clear. Okay, great, perfect. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you for your confirmation. And we'll just wait for another 1 minute. The scheduled time to start the webinar is 3:30. We'll just wait for another 1 minute to allow other participants as well to join. We have a house of around 145 participants and counting. Let's give another 1 minute and then we'll begin. All right, folks, welcome back and very good evening once again to all of you. Before we begin the session, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Puneet Sharma, and I work for Amazon Internet Services, stationed in Bangalore currently. My day looks like involving training and certification sessions to our customers, to participants on various AWS technologies, architecting, systems operations, developing. So pretty much on majority of the AWS technologies I deliver over the training. I am accompanied with a very good friend and a colleague of mine, Disha. She's there on the chat support for you. If you have any questions, any queries during this 1.5 hours, please feel free to post them on the questions window, and as and when Disha will go around and look at your question, she'll revert with the appropriate links or the appropriate answers for you. Few do's and don'ts, folks, for this session. Please don't be on a VPN connection. We have seen in the past there are some voice drops in between if you guys connect over to your corporate VPN. Just be connected to your home network, your office network, or your home network. Don't connect to a VPN connection. And secondly, we are not recording this session, right? It's a webinar. So as a compliance thing, as a legal thing with AWS, we are not authorized to record this session. We'll not be able to share these slide decks with you. This is a 1.5 hour webinar as such. So we'll not be sharing these official slides, but yeah, we'll be definitely sharing with you some reference material and some important links which are on the public domain of AWS, which you can use to enhance your learnings on big data. Disha, you mind unmuting yourself and introducing yourself to the participants so we begin the session?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Very good evening. Hope everyone is doing well. Everyone is keeping safe. I'm Disha Babla today for the chat support. And please ensure to, ensure you're not behind the VPN. And just keep on posting your questions on the Q&A, and I'll be sharing some important links so that you have a better subject clarity. And you'll not be eligible, as in you'll not be able to receive any recordings or the deck. So relax back and sit and enjoy the session. Over to you, Puneet, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Disha. Yep, I get a question on the questions window. Do we get a certificate for this session, Prince asks? So Prince, this is a webinar, buddy, so we'll not be sharing any certificate or something. So my objective for today is to give you a high-level overview, a bird's eye view, basically on what is big data, what are the fundamentals of big data, and a few services we'll talk about on AWS, which helps you to achieve the big data architectures on AWS. That's the objective for today. For certifications, you have to give an examination on AWS Data Analytics certification now, and then you get your certificate on data analytics, or you attend a 3 days course with us and you get a certificate of attendance there. All right, so let's get started, folks, without much ado, and let's see what we have in store for you guys for this period of 1.5 hours. We would be starting with an overview of big data. We'll talk about the database architectures. What is Hadoop and MapReduce? Most commonly, when somebody talks about big data, they often think about Hadoop as the primary thing which comes to their mind, or somehow big data is synonymous to Hadoop. We'll try to differentiate between big data and Hadoop, how they are similar or how they are different to each other in module number 3. We'll talk about Hive and Pig, and then why AWS is the best choice for you to create your big data architectures. So that's what we would be doing in this period of 1.5 hours. So folks, sit back, relax, just enjoy the session. It's any type of a learning is always good, and learning is always fruitful when it's done from an open mind, right? So just be receptive to new takeaways, new knowledge, or new terms which would be coming your way. Let's start with an introduction to big data, what big data is all about. Now, I very firmly believe in this saying that we are living in a data world right now. Various statistics, they say the total amount of the data which is there in the world is not in terabytes, it's not in petabytes, but it has reached to zettabyte scales now. The total amount of the data in the world is around 50 zettabytes. There would be, of course, some standard deviations there. 52, 53 zettabytes. These last statistics I know is around 3-4 months old, which were published on International Data Corporation, IDC. So yeah, there could be some deviations to that, but roughly if we take 50 zettabytes as well, that's humongous amount of data. That's huge. It's zettabytes, just imagine GBs, TBs, PBs, petabytes, exabytes, and then you have a zettabyte. And so that's huge amount of data which we have across the globe. And to a surprising fact, 70 to 75% of this data has been generated in the past 3 to 4 years. What are the reasons to that? Why is there this exponential growth in the data? The reason to that is you have IoT things. That's one of the major contributors. You have streaming data which are coming in from multiple sources. Internet of Things is by far one of the major contributors towards the generation of this much huge amount of data. Think for yourself, we are surrounded with IoT devices. You would have sensors, and we have refrigerators, and we have televisions, you have smart TVs, and you have air conditions and smart homes, and now you have, we have our fans, and you have your tube lights, and everything are on, are on IoT devices, which could be controlled by your smartphones. We are surrounded with data, and we are living in a very fascinating age. I firmly believe that. People who are born like in 1980s or probably in 1970s, we are the people who are into the age of analog as well. We have seen that analog era as well, and we are seeing the transition era into digital world as well. Our children probably will never see what are those analog things. They are only much more into the digital side of things. And supposedly said, whenever we talk about big data, to define the characteristics of big data, when does a data become big? You might be wondering if it is 10 GB of data, which becomes a big data, whether it is 100 GB of data or 10 terabytes of data, how much amount of data contributes to a big data? Now, there is no clear demarcation to that. You cannot say that if I have 10 GB of data, I have 20 GB of data, I have 20 TB of data, or even petabytes of data, that's a big data. Big data is completely defined by the characteristics. You might have heard about some V's for big data: volume, variety, velocity. These are the essential 3 V's of big data. And now you have much more characteristics of big data as well, which are your variability, visualization, value, and veracity as well. So those are the 7 V's of big data altogether. But essentially, when the concept of big data started, when this terminology big data started to surface the IT industry around 10-12 years back, at that point of time, it was all about 3 V's of big data: volume, variety, and velocity of the data. And to some extent, still now we try to understand big data from these 3 characteristics. Now, just imagine, probably if I have to analyze 20 terabytes of data, probably if I have to analyze that much amount of data, I need to first of all have a storage capacity for storing that 20 terabytes of data. And secondly, I need to have compute capacities as well, so that I could analyze that 20 terabytes of data. So for me as an individual, probably 20 terabytes is a huge data. It's a big data for me. But for organizations who handle petabytes of data on a daily basis, Amazon handles 2 petabytes on an average. I'm talking about, we handle 2 petabytes of data on a daily basis as an organization. So probably for them, the definition and the demarcations for big data would differ. Probably for them, the as an organization as a whole, when we reach to exabytes of a scale, we consider that as a big data. We do have compute capacities available. We do have processing power available to analyze that much amount of big data. So volume, variety, and velocity are one of the most important, 3 V's we can say, which defines the essential characteristics of big data. And why big data? Multiple sources, you have more demand for analysis, and data is growing exponentially. In 2020, we have now, last year I told you we have data in zettabytes now, not even in exabytes. We have, breached the breached the mark for exabytes of data, and we are living into the zettabyte data world now. What type of industries, if you're wondering and you ask me a question, Puneet, what type of industries use big data? I can tell you from our experiences that there is not a single organization which is operating at a scalable manner who don't use big data. You will see the footprints of big data in almost every industry, ranging from advertising to oil and gas to retail to entertainment industry, gaming, social media, security, consumer health, and you name the industry, you would find the footprints of big data there. The organizations, they cannot survive in this competitive world nowadays without harvesting and without without leveraging the power of big data. If you think for yourself, just imagine this thing, that since the very beginning we have always focused upon increasing the storage capacities. You might have seen some images which surface on the social media, on WhatsApp or Facebook, which shows in 1956 there's that IBM drive which they have to move from one place to another, and that's a huge space, and that was probably 100 MB of a drive it was, if I remember. If my memory is correct and I remember it correctly, they were showing how much space 100 MB of a drive used to take way back in 1956. That was all magnetic era at that point of time, and there were, you need to had transportation equipments need to be available to transport them from one place to another, and you'll require at least 4 to 5 people to transfer that device. Now nobody thinks about 100 MB. You carry GBs and probably terabytes as well now in our pockets. Smartphones, they come up with 128 GB is a very common storage. Gigabytes are very common, which we carry in hand. Nobody talks about MB. So the point of saying this is that organizations really throw away data. Storage is no more a consideration. Nobody likes to delete data. Just think for yourself, when would have been the last time you would have deleted a data from your machine? I don't remember. I mean, until and unless there's some redundant file or something, there's an actual duplicacy and I catch a hold of it, then I delete some file. But otherwise, nobody likes to delete the data. You have cloud storages now, which have become a much more cost-effective solutions to store your data. But the problem in the big data world is, although we can store this much huge amount of data, but when it comes to processing this data, that's where there is a funnel. We have not compensated enough in terms of increasing the compute capacities to the extent what we have increased in terms of storages. Storages, we store, nobody deletes the data. Organizations really throw away data, but computing of that data, making sense out of that data and analyzing that data is where the bottlenecks come into. And that's why we require architectures around big data which can do processing of that data in that stipulated time frame. The answers which you need to get from a big data analysis need to be in reference to a specific time frame. Just imagine that if a credit card company gives you an alert that somebody just tried to access your credit card and he had made a purchase of X amount, and they give you that message after 1 hour, you'll, of course, that message is of no use to me. You'll say, why are you sending me a message now when the job what has to be done, it has been done now. It makes sense when they send you this message immediately, or probably even before that transaction happens, to intervene for your intervention. That is it you who are trying to make this transaction. So we do that in real time. And that's all big data analysis. That's a real-time big data analysis, or a near real-time big data analysis. And then there are some use cases which would be around batch processing analysis as well. So every kind of answers which you need to get need to be within that stipulated time frame. If that time frame is over, probably that analysis is of no use to me. So let's try to take a look. How do we do that analysis? So the architectural components around big data would revolve around parallelism, Hadoop, HDFS, Yarn, and the type of jobs which we can run. So let's try to see some of the components. The core components, the core premises of analyzing your big data is doing the job in parallel by distributing the load across multiple machines. In order to compensate that thing, what I was telling you previously, that we do not have that much amount of compute capacities available, and that's why we look out for other ways to analyze that big data. One way which we have found out in order to compensate for that lack in compute capacities now is distributing the job across multiple nodes, across multiple compute instances. You get the job done in parallel, and then we combine the job. So a big data set is divided into smaller sets, and we distribute that set across a cluster. And that's where Hadoop comes into the picture. Hadoop is by far the most prominent and the most commonly used framework for your big data analysis, although there would be other as well. But uh, the footprints which Hadoop has in the world of big data, nobody is unaware about Hadoop, I guess. Everyone, if you are into the IT industry or working into the IT industry, you must be aware about big data, and you have aspirations of learning big data. And of course, you must have heard about big data. Hadoop is not a database. Right? Hadoop is not a database. It is a processing framework. The first time it surfaced was around 10-12 years back. Doug Cutting was the person who made the last commit to Hadoop. It's an open source. You will find it licensed under the Apache Software Foundation. It's a scalable data storage, it's processing framework under which you can analyze structured data, semi-structured data, and unstructured data as well. Hadoop is not only meant to analyze the structured data, but Hadoop is also meant to analyze the unstructured data as well. So I'll take some random questions as well in between, folks. So Manoj has a question. Can you please tell us what kind of physical storage is used in AWS? So Manoj, I'll come to that specific questions as and when I talk about the AWS services, but just to clarify your doubt at this point of time, we do have SSD storages as well. We do have HDD storages as well. Under SSDs as well, we do have multiple types of SSDs also, depending upon how much throughput you are looking out at, what is the performance you are looking out at. Right? We do have GP, general purpose 1, general purpose 2, general purpose 3. We have IO1, which is your IOPS optimized. The performance of an SSD is measured in terms of IOPS. So we have IO1 and IO2, which is your provisioned throughput, provisioned IOPS, sorry. And so those are the type of drives which are available at your disposal for storing your data. That's regarding your block level storages. At an object level storage, we do have S3. Every one of you would be aware about S3, which is a unlimited storage, internet traversable storage. You can store any amount of data on that. Right? So we do support SSD, we do support HDD as well. I hope that answers your question. Hadoop is not an EC2. So somebody is asking me that question. Hadoop is not EC2. On top of EC2, you run Hadoop. Hadoop is a framework. Hadoop is not a hardware. Folks, remember, Hadoop is a framework, and that framework constitutes of 4 major components. You have Hadoop Common, which is a set of libraries which are used to run the Hadoop framework. These are like the backbone of running your Hadoop framework. Then you have the underlying file system, which is your distributed file system, DFS. And it's running on top of Hadoop, so we call it as Hadoop Distributed File System, HDFS. Then you have Hadoop Yarn. Yarn is yet another resource negotiator. So the job of this guy, Yarn, is basically to negotiate for resources. What type of resources? Compute resources and storage resources. So imagine Yarn as a manager who knows that how much workload is being done by a compute instance, and which instance, which of your worker node is free at the moment, which EC2 instance is free, and to which server I can allocate a load to. That's all that thing is done by your Yarn. And then you have MapReduce, which is an algorithm as well, and it's a programming framework in which you write your Hadoop programs either in Java, in Python, in Scala programming languages. R programming is also supported. And so it's MapReduce is actually an algorithm, a mathematical algorithm, which works on the fundamentals of a mapper phase and a reducer phase. We would, however, whenever we talk about MapReduce, we talk in terms of the framework, the programming framework which is there, in which you write your business logics either in Python, Java, or any other programming language of your choice. Now, when you store the data on Hadoop in HDFS, what happens is you are storing the data across, there is default of 3 times your data is replicated across various nodes. So if you see here, there are your name node X, name node Y, and name node Z, and then you have data nodes here, right? So name nodes are your master nodes, you can call them as, who are maintaining all the details about the data nodes here. These data nodes are also your servers, but they are used for processing. Name node is used for managing the cluster, and this is one cluster and so on. This is a second cluster and a third cluster and so on. You would have multiple clients who would be connecting over to your name nodes and submitting their jobs, and then name nodes further distributes that job to your data nodes, get the job done in parallel, and display the results to your client. Yarn is yet another resource negotiator. So this guy, again, like I mentioned, is responsible for keeping a track of the memory, the CPU, the disk utilization, the network bytes in, the network bytes out, the you know the disk utilization that you have done, how much HDFS disk utilization has been done over, how much swap memory has been used, and so on. All that details is captured over by this yet another resource negotiator, which is running an application master daemon. A Java daemon runs on this data node of yours, on this name node of yours, sorry, which is running this resource manager, and it captures all that details of yours, which data node is free, which data node is more occupied, and where do I distribute the job, and things like those. All that thing is done by your yet another resource negotiator, Yarn. MapReduce, like I told you, whenever the term you hear MapReduce, first thing, just try to gauge the perspective in which that term is being referred, whether people are referring MapReduce as an algorithm or whether they are referring to it as a programming framework. So MapReduce as a programming framework has 2 phases. You have a map phase and you have a reduce phase. Inside these map and reduce phases, you would have a partition, shuffle, and sort phases as well, where your data is moved from one node to another in order to process it more finely, and in order to process your data as efficiently as possible. There would be a possibility that you would have to move the data from one node to another, depending upon what type of query you are running. You are running an aggregation query, or you want to find out some minimum values, you want to find out some median, some mode, some standard deviation, whatever descriptive statistics you need to run on that data. So you might need to shuffle the data, and these are all the phases you have inside. The main phases are map reduce. Under your map reduce, you would have partition, shuffle, and sort phases as well. Then you will hear about Hive as well. Hive is basically a data warehousing solution. It is a SQL compatible data warehouse solution. You might have noticed, folks, that since the very beginning, what ways we know to query the data in a database is an SQL way of writing our SQL queries. Select statement, select this from this table, where clause you write, and then we write the predicate clauses and so on. Order by, and filter by this, sort by this, whatever predicate clauses we write. And it's very convenient, and it is a more easier way to understand and query your data on SQL basis. And that's why Hive has been made SQL compatible. It's an open source data warehousing solution where you can query your structured data. You can also query semi-structured and unstructured data, but for that you have to give some kind of a schema. Definitions have to be created on top of it. That's what Hive is. Pig is again a framework for doing majorly your ETL transformation, extract, transform, and load. One of the major jobs to be done in big data is to extract the data from one source, to transform that data, and then to load that data into a destination. And for doing that, conveniently, you have a programming framework, which is Pig. The one of the considerations you can say about Pig is that it is not SQL compatible, although you have to learn a new paradigm, a new programming paradigm, which is called as Pig Latin. It would be quite similar to SQL statements and SQL queries, but not entirely similar. There would be the syntax and the expressions, how you write in a programming language, would differ in Pig as compared to in Hive, which is more of SQL compatible. So Pig combines the capabilities of part SQL and part MapReduce, so you get the best out of both the worlds. That's basically what Pig is. Let's quickly do a knowledge check, folks, and I want all of you to participate into this. And there's nothing right and nothing wrong, so whatever you think, please do go around and share your answers here. Do we have swappiness in Hadoop? If yes, okay, Junaid, so see, that thing would be abstracted from you. Of course, there is swappiness in Hadoop. Not swappiness, I'll say, because you will not swap the data, but yes, you will copy the data from one node to another, depending upon what is the best way to process that data. For an example, if I have 1 GB of data on one node, and there is another file which needs to be combined with that 1 GB of the data, and that is of 200 MB. So rather than copying that 1 GB file over the network to that 200 MB node, where that 200 MB file is there, it would be better that if I shuffle that 200 MB of data onto the node where that 1 GB is, so that my, the network bytes which are used are less. So that kind of shuffle phase is there, and then you do the analysis on that node. So all that shuffle and sort and partitions would be there, and that's the entire mechanism which you need to learn about Hadoop. What are the best ways to query your data? What are the best partition strategies which are there, so that you can do your batch processing in Hadoop in the least possible time and with the least possible latencies. I hope that answers your question. All right, so let's do a knowledge check quickly, folks. Select the 3 primary factors which can determine if a big data solution is appropriate. We just talked about it. Yes, Rishikesh, Hadoop works with binary data as well, with images and videos. But for images and videos, you need to have mechanisms, probably like if you are looking out for running some kind of recognition images. So deep learning is and algorithms which are supported on Spark framework, right? So you can run those kind of machine learning algorithms on top of Hadoop processing engine. There is one processing engine on top of Hadoop called as Spark. Right, that's absolutely right, folks. Volume, variety, and velocity. So let's take a look at the second question then. How many copies of each data block are written to HDFS? I told that thing as well to you. What do you think are how many copies of each data block are written to your HDFS? Whether it's 1, 4, or 3, absolutely right, folks. The default replication factor in Hadoop is 3. This is default. Of course, you can change it. You can say that I don't want my replication factor to be 3. Right? So have it 4. So we'll have one file. We'll replicate it 4 times across different nodes. You say it to be 2. We'll replicate it only twice. So that's configurable, but the default value is 3, which most of you have answered it correctly. All right, so let's come over to our module 2 and let's take a look at the database architectures now. let's talk about relational databases. And relational databases are the ones which we have, which we have seen, we have known since the very beginning itself. We have all worked with relational databases. I know, I'm not sure how many of you would have even heard about it. The first the first relational database which I interacted with way back during my engineering days was FoxPro. And then later on, suddenly Microsoft's SQL and of course Oracle, they took over the race for the databases like a storm. I'm not sure if any one of you would have. Now it's deprecated; it's no more supported as such. Yeah, but that was FoxPro was the first one. Just remembered long back. Right, so relational databases, they are like in the genes of every every database person who would be interested in becoming a database administrator or who wants to work in the field of database. Relational databases are the ones which you have to be aware about. Now, there are other type of databases as well which are surfacing the market. Like you have NoSQL databases, you have time series databases, you have graph databases as well. These are all other type of databases, but still relational databases have their own special place in the domain. They have flat data and structure, and they support SQL. So let's try to see what a flat data structure is all about. So when you store data in a relational databases, by flat data we mean you store the data in a non-nested form in a row and a column manner. Relational databases, they do support complex joins, they do support complex queries. You would have one table which could be related to another table on the basis of a primary foreign key relationships, and then you have multiple type of joins are there. You have inner joins, you have outer joins, you have a full outer join, and so on. There would be multiple type of joins which are also supported on those two tables, depending upon what type of analysis you need to do, what type of queries you want to run against that database. There would be different type of joins which are there. But relational data is of course when you are creating your relationships. We are creating a kind of fact schemas, and you are creating kind of your snowflake schemas. Snowflake schemas are when you have table A is related to table B and table B is related to table C. Then I can query the data directly from table A and table C. You follow the discrete relationships there. And so similarly, you have table A related to B, related to C, and then related to D. I could query the data from table A and table D. It would work in a discrete manner on the basis of that chaining process. Multiple relationships would be there. So all that kind of complex relationships are supported. SQL, we very well understand. Needless to talk about SQL, structured query language. Data definition, it supports data definition language, data markup, data manipulation languages as well, and data control language. So DDL, DML, and DCL are the subcomponents of your SQL structured query language. You write create statements and select statements. SQL allows you to access the data, describe your data, define what your data is, and so on. And which database doesn't support SQL? I mean, ranging from Amazon RDS to Amazon Aurora SQL Server, open sources like MySQL and Postgre, licensed ones, Oracle and Microsoft SQL, all of them go around and support SQL syntaxes. Now, one very good thing about relational databases are they support ACID compliances. Relational databases are ACID compliance, and it is a really good feature as well. ACID implies atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. In layman terms, if I have to explain ACID to somebody, it's generally a all or a nothing architecture, which means one transaction. So ACID compliances are also called as transactional databases as well, or sometimes just referred to as transactions also. You might have heard the term OLTP and OLAP databases. OLTP is where online transactional processing, which these type of databases are working at the back end of your back end of your applications, your web applications, right, or any other internet facing applications of yours. We are writing the data onto these databases. Now you are making a transaction. That one transaction have to be executed in entirety or have to be rolled back in entirety if something fails out of that transaction. Even if one part of that transaction fails, the entire transaction would have to be reverted. Transactions are all or nothing architecture. Consistency implies only valid data is saved. Isolation, transactions do not affect each other. So two transactions will not intervene in between. They would not overlap in between. Both of them would be executed in isolation. Durability, of course, implies written data will not be lost. We have to take care of mechanisms to safeguard that data. But yes, ACID compliances are really important from any perspective, especially your financial transactional data. Of course, we'll not like our account to be debited twice, right? And of course, the sender party would not like our account to be credited twice, and so on. So either it's all or a nothing architecture with your ACID compliances. Then we have a set of databases which are NoSQL databases as well. And these are surfacing over the industry. We are seeing more of NoSQL databases. Now, let's try to understand the difference between both of them. SQL, which are relational databases. So both are synonymous to each other. When somebody says relational database or when somebody says SQL database, they mean one and the same thing. And then you have the likes of NoSQL databases as well. So what is a NoSQL database or a non-relational database? Both of them are synonymous to each other again. These are those databases which do not follow a strict schema architecture. They have a flexible schema, and that's the beauty of a NoSQL database as well. With your relational databases, you will always have a fixed schema architecture. And you would have to predefine a schema in that architecture. In NoSQL, probably for an example, just to put things into perspective here, I use my first name and last name, Puneet Sharma. That's it. Somebody might use middle name as well, Puneet Kumar Sharma, right? And so on. So in case of a relational database, whether somebody uses a middle name or not, you would have to still define that schema of a middle name. In case of a NoSQL database, no need to define. As and when if anybody uses that data, we'll store the data in the form of a key value pair. The rows are equivalent. We call them as items. Columns are equivalent to what you call as attributes in case of a NoSQL databases. So your data is stored in the form of a key value pairs out here. Type of NoSQL databases, you will find key value stores, document stores are there, wide column stores, and graph databases. All these are subcategories of your NoSQL databases only. HBase, Cassandra, they are wide column store databases. Neo4j is the pioneer in the world of graph databases, which majorly focuses upon relationships. So all your social networking sites, they are under the hoods, they are powered by your graph databases. CouchDB and MongoDB are the one which are document databases. They are quite similar to key value stores, but they store a value as a single document. So they have much similarities like a key value store databases. And then we have DynamoDB, which is Amazon's very fast performing, which gives you millisecond latencies. And for your application, for your data retrieval, it can give you millisecond to microsecond response times as well. The objective of these NoSQL databases is not complex queries. It is not to follow ACID compliances. Rather, the objective of NoSQL databases is fast performance. They will give you millisecond to microsecond latencies, response time, just imagine. And in the world now, I was reading out some statistics few days back, and those statistics say that as and when the technology is increasing and we are moving over from 3G to 4G, we moved, and then to 4G to LTE, the long-term evolution technology, and then from LTE to 5G we moved over. We somehow, the response time which people like to wait for an application to give them the response is decreasing. In 2019, that average response time was around 7 seconds before people start to think about alternatives to switch to a different application. And now the response time has decreased over to 3 to 4 seconds on an average. Just think for yourself, if you don't get a response, YouTube doesn't play or any application doesn't give you a response once you have clicked on a submit button in 3 to 4 seconds, next time you will think about whether I should use this application or probably any other one, any payment applications and so on. So and that's where these these fast performing databases play their role. Let's talk about data warehousing then. OLAP versus OLTP. OLTP is my transactional processing, which is the backbone of these are the backbone of your applications. They act as a single sort of source of truth. They are your data generators, right? So any point of system sale, any of your online applications, any of your web applications, the databases which are powering these applications would be OLTP databases. Out of those OLTP databases, and combining the OLTP data, then cleansing the data, extracting the data from these OLTP databases, doing some kind of transformations, cleaning that data up, and making extracting only the meaningful data, dropping some columns out of it, and fabricating the data to the way we want is the transformation stage. And then you load that data into something we call as a data warehouses. Data warehouses are also synonymous to your OLAP, online analytical processing. The objective of these type of databases is not to not to support transactions, is not to act as a single point of truth, but the objective of these databases is to power up your analytical queries. That's why they are named as analytical processing. All your business intelligence reports, your charts which you are creating, your pie charts, your graph charts, and all the sales reports, comparison of the sales report, how much my company performed in the last year and how much my company is performing in this year. All those kind of your responses, all that kind of your BI reports are created through your OLAP. Now, OLTP can also support these kind of requirements. They can also support business intelligence reports, but then you are overburdening a system where an OLTP database would have to act as a data generator for you as well, and they have to serve for your read queries also. They can do that, but it's just not an ideal way, and it's just not the best way to create your reports, your BI reports. The best way to do that is to stick to your OLAP databases. Generally, the storage in them would be terabytes to petabytes. The users would be few into that. You would have consolidated data in your OLAP. In case of your OLTP, you would have operational data, accounting databases or online retail transactions. These are all the examples of OLTP, but reporting and decision support systems are all examples of your OLAP. So OLAPs are the databases, data warehouses. Data warehouses are kind of your databases only, but the only difference is that data warehouses are columnar in nature. They store the data in a type of a column format rather than a row-based format. Most of your OLTP databases, they store the data in the form of a row-based format, which means the data which is physically stored on your storages, on your SSDs or your hard drives, they're actually stored as one column consecutively. The entire column would be stored in consecutive memory bytes, and then the other column would be followed by the subsequent memory bytes, and so on. Use cases are reporting and data mining and machine learning, batch processing, decision support systems, business intelligence reports. All these are your use cases for your data warehouses. Then you have something called as data marts as well. Data mart is just a subset of your data warehouse. Data warehouse is probably an enterprise-wide data we store in a data warehouse. After we clean the data, we have done all the fabrications required to be done on that data. After we have done all that, we store the data in a single point of truth in our data warehouses. So any data which is there in the data warehouse, you could imagine that data has to be a curated data, a cleansed data, free of errors, free of outliers. That's the data which will always speak the truth. It's the truthful data. And a subsection of that data is what is a data mart, probably a department-wide data, single subject area, or one project it is serving. Any subset you can create out of your data mart. Pros and cons of your relational databases. Pros, of course, we know relational databases is a proven technology. We have always known how to work with relational database, and somehow it's more easier to understand the concepts related to relational databases because For a very long time we have been working and we have known relational databases, but now you have non-relational databases also, which are really helpful, which can really serve the purpose when you have requirements of latency sensitive applications. Relational databases are widely adopted and they are less risky. They are very useful for transactional latencies or for your transactional workloads. Their drawbacks could be scalability. Most of your relational databases, they scale vertically. When I say vertical scaling, what do I actually mean by vertical scaling? Is that I'm adding more horsepower, which means I'm adding more compute capacities, more vCPU and more RAM on the same piece of hardware. Contrary to that, horizontal scaling means you are adding more compute instances of the same type. You are not adding the memory and you are not adding the CPU power on the same hardware, but you are adding more hardwares. Fixed schema, that's one more drawback of a relational databases. No SQL databases, if you talk about the pros and cons, they go well beyond SQL, rapid development, horizontal scaling, and they are better for large data sets. Amazon DynamoDB is an unlimited storage. You can store as much amount of data in DynamoDB as possible. Nobody will stop you. Relational databases, on the contrary, in terms of the storage size, they would have capacities. They would have restrictions there, 128 terabytes, 64 terabytes, and something like those. Most of these databases, their single database storage would be limited to some terabytes, and you would have to keep on adding more storage capacities, but then that too would have some limitations. You can go up to a particular threshold only there. Then coming over to data warehouses. Data warehouses, your advantages are fast data retrieval, resolve inconsistencies, and better for business intelligence. But drawbacks could be time consuming to construct. Data warehousing, creating a data warehouse could take you months to years as well. An effective data warehouse to create, it can literally take months to years. 2 months is very common to start populating your data warehouses and to get it working. And it could, for large organizations, it could take years as well. There would be additional security constraints as well. You might want to encrypt your data at rest. Then you would have to figure out your ways to decrypt the data before your data goes into the query engine for processing and so on. So those things could add a bit of to your security concerns as well. And they would be complex to maintain because you handle complex joins in that star and snowflake schema which I was talking about. One fact table related to multiple dimension table, and then dimension tables are further related to other dimension tables for querying. All that kind of discrete relationships are possible with your data warehouses, and that's why they would be complex to maintain. So let's take a look at knowledge check, and I want folks to answer here. Why are companies switching towards Snowflake? So Shrayu, see, it's not like companies are switching over to Snowflake. We have statistics which say like companies are shifting over to Amazon. Aurora is a very fast growing database. So we have seen people shifting from Oracle to or Microsoft SQL to Aurora and things like those. But yeah, there would be some USPs. There would be some features which one database would be providing. Like there is a masking facility which your Oracle database provides. Then there are your Oracle Golden Gate for your backups are very seamless, so that's why people used to prefer that. People who are entirely on Amazon, they prefer Amazon Aurora. It's a very fast and very scalable database, and similarly there would be some use cases around Snowflake as well. Right, so which database type is most widely adopted? Absolutely right, relational. Which database type provides the greatest flexibility for schema changes? Question number 2. Absolutely right, folks. That's your NoSQL database. Schema changes could be there. Which database type excels at providing OLAP from a variety of data sources? Absolutely right. That's your data warehouses. That's your data warehouses. Right, and now we come over to our module number 3, which is Hadoop and MapReduce. So let's talk about this thing now, Hadoop and MapReduce. Well, in this module, we'll talk about the overview of Hadoop. We'll talk about some use cases for Hadoop. We try to talk a bit on the architectures. On the latest versions of Hadoop, we had Hadoop 1 and now we have Hadoop 2. What is Hadoop? Hadoop is a framework. Don't confuse, Hadoop is not a database. Hadoop is not a hardware. Hadoop is a framework, which is used for processing large data sets. And the underlying ideology behind creating Hadoop was to do distributed processing. Same way, if one person has to build a wall, that's probably 100 meters wide, and if 10 people build the same wall, how much time one person will take and how much time 10 persons would take? Obviously 10 persons would take less, right? So that's the entire crux of doing the job in parallel. Just give me a moment, folks. All right, so with Hadoop, what we basically create is a cluster. And what a cluster is a combination of your nodes. You can get processing power of thousands of nodes, rapid data transfer between clients and the nodes. We get resiliency during our node failures because your data is already copied on different nodes as well. So data is durable. Even if one node fails, you would have your data replicated on the other node. So that doesn't lead to a data loss. By default, the replication factor is 3. Until and unless you manually change the replication factor to 1, then you are at the risk of losing the data. But by default, if you stick to the default configurations when you are installing Hadoop, the default replication factor is 3. And this is a high-level overview of an Hadoop architecture where you have the MapReduce as the data processing layer. Right. For resource management, we have Yarn. The underlying data storage is done on your HDFS, Hadoop Distributed File System. This was for Hadoop version 1, and this is for my Hadoop version 2. Hadoop 2.x data processing, MapReduce, PigScripts, Hive, HBase, Storm, GraphLib. Spark is an in-memory data processing engine, in-memory big data processing engine, which is very, very popular. You have OpenMPI and we have Search and Weave. And one good thing about Hadoop is that you will find n number of tools which are compatible with Hadoop. The underlying storage is done on this HDFS. And the integration is done via this Yarn. This is a kind of your resource negotiator. So this guy knows. This has all the details in a tabular form. It keeps all the details about the CPU utilization, the memory utilization, network bytes in, disk percentage of how much disk utilization has been done, network bytes in and network bytes out, and so on. Now, this was Hadoop 1 architecture where my data is of course stored on your data nodes. Your data is split. These are your data node 1, 2, 3, and 4. Name node is is your controller node who is responsible for handling your data jobs. He doesn't do a processing by himself. He is there to allocate the job to these other data nodes. Having a single name node could act as a point of failure. Right? So optionally, you could have a secondary name node as well, and we'll have the metadata backup here also. So in case primary node goes down, you always could fall back to your secondary node. This is your 2.x architecture, which is more better scalable. Name node and secondary name node. We have a passive name node as well, where the replication is happening up. This is not a single point of failure. We have a secondary name node. And then you have these data nodes, which are doing our processing, and our data is also being stored here, and our data processing also happen at these nodes. Name node doesn't do any processing. Name node is responsible for connectivity to the client, accepting the application. So imagine it as like your project managers who get the job for you and then make the job done by the team. That team is these data node team of yours. Once the job is done, name node will compile up the results and send the response back to the client. Data processing not possible to run non-MapReduce applications on Hadoop 1.x architecture previously. Right? That was not entirely possible, but Hadoop 2 architectures now, they are not just limited to MapReduce. They support multiple other programming paradigms as well. You have support for Spark, and you have support for Storm, and you have support for Hive and Pig, and all that what you have seen now. You don't have to worry about Hadoop 1 as such now, because the latest releases of Hadoop, they come only with Hadoop 2.x, right? We have 2.7 dot something is the latest release for Hadoop what we have now. Right? And it's better scalable, no overburden on daemons as well. And these are all your data nodes which we have, and these are the node managers. This is actually Java daemon. The underlying programming in which your Hadoop is created is in Java, and you can write your Java application seamlessly in your Hadoop. But Hadoop also supports Scala. Scala is a functional programming language which is built on top of Java. The abstraction libraries are available just like you have in Java. The only thing is Scala is more concise in comparison to Java. What 10 lines of code you would have to probably write in Java, in Scala you could do that with 3 or 4 lines, because it's more of a functional programming language and a lot of things are abstracted from us. Yes, Saptarshi, yes, Hadoop can use DynamoDB for data processing. Your data could be stored on DynamoDB, and for processing, I could pull the data into my Hadoop cluster from DynamoDB. That is pretty much possible. All right, so integration with Hadoop components, support for running Hadoop on Windows. Initially, Hadoop was only meant for Linux-based instances, but now you have support for running Hadoop on Windows OS as well. It's backward compatible. If you have your programs which are written for Hadoop 1, they can be executed on Hadoop 2 version as well. Ability to use your NFS network file system version 3 to access your data in HDFS very seamlessly. Yarn integration is of course there, and for backup, I could take HDFS snapshots. So Hadoop 2 is a more better way of dealing with your big data use cases. MapReduce, let's try to take a look at overview architecture and uses of MapReduce. MapReduce is a parallel processing framework. You can write your programs in C# and Java, C++, and Python applications as well, which are your MapReduce programs, and they run on your Hadoop clusters. Right? So previously only MR was supported in Hadoop 1, but now you also have the support for other Spark and other programming frameworks as well. Why MapReduce? So prior to MapReduce, management of hundreds of thousands of processors were difficult. Parallelization and distribution of your jobs were also difficult. Status and monitoring capture and input-output scheduling and all those things were really a difficult thing prior to the world of MapReduce. With MapReduce, it provides you more of a scale-out architecture. And for big data, we require scaled-out architectures. You cannot predict. Sometimes you cannot predict how many compute nodes you would require for your processing. Runs on large set of commodity hardwares. The good thing is you don't require some special hardwares to run MapReduce. It could run on commodity hardwares. It's fault tolerant, optimized scheduling, and its flexibility for developers, and it interoperates with tools like your Hive and Pig. Now, network bandwidth, yes, it could be a bottleneck, right, for your Hadoop clusters, especially when your client is submitting jobs to your Hadoop name node. Depending upon how much data you are processing, network bandwidth could be a bottleneck there. And so when we are creating Hadoop clusters, we try to create the clusters in a tight compatible area, in a kind of your physical space where all the nodes are as close to each other, so that the space between and the network connectivity between one node to another is as less as possible, so that network bandwidth could be maximized. In AWS, if you create these, we try to place the EMR clusters, which is an Hadoop's implementation on AWS, in as close by region, and physically we try to place your nodes as close to each other as possible, giving you 20 Gbps to 100 Gbps of your network bandwidth. Right? That's your gigabits per second. So why process data in MapReduce as a high level example? Up to 4 weeks to develop your own program if you have to do multiple tasks on your own, and these are your different workers. Now, some tasks would be assigned over to multiple jobs. That's your name node. Your manager is allocating the jobs to you. Now, the beauty of MapReduce is parallelism. You submit the job to these 4 worker nodes simultaneously. They'll work simultaneously, and then all the tasks would be completed over and would be returned back over to the client, to your manager. Manager would compile it up and return it back to the client. Under the hoods, that programming framework, what it does, there is a mapper phase and there is a reducer phase. So with mapper phase, what happens is, take for this example, I want to do a word count of how many times apple, oranges, mangoes, and these words are coming in. So what we'll do first is we will split the file on some logic basis, split the file on a comma, on a space. Probably this is a space for an example, a comma or a semicolon or a hyphen, on whatever delimiter basis. So you will get each and every word separate here. So you'll get apple, orange, mango separate. The next thing we do is mapping. After split, you do a dot map. So if you have to write a program here, we'll write something like sc.text file to read the file from the HDFS storage. We'll provide the path here of the file. Then we'll say dot split the file on some basis, space, hyphen, whatever delimiter you are using. Then we'll say dot map what? Map the each and every individual value to 1. So that would be your map stayed out here. And then we say reduce by key on some basis. We'll say reduce by key. And then you do the reduction on whatever basis we have to reduce. So apple will have 1, orange will have 1 value. So this becomes your key and this becomes your value. This is a tuple which has been created for us now. Then you do this sorting, and the shuffling phase will get all the apples in one node, will get all the oranges in the other one, and so on, depending upon how much data needs to be transferred over the bandwidth, over the network basically. So to reduce the network bandwidth, we'll try to do the sort and the shuffling phase as efficiently as possible. And then you come to the reduce phase. Reduce is that what we are doing out here is we are basically so what we are doing is we are doing a summation of of the values here. So we are aggregating all the values. Apple is 3 times, oranges are 3 times. This is your reduction phase. And then we'll combine all these results and give the final output to the name node, that apple is coming 3 times, oranges are 3 times, and so on. This is under the hoods. That's how your MapReduce framework basically works. It works on joins. Benefits are it provides you insights and analysis, and this is how we'll write the programming construct as well. This is how you write your programs in Java, in Python, in Scala, and so on for your MapReduce. You have MapReduce combiners and partitioners, which are your optional mini reducers. They run in memory. One good thing about MapReduce is now you can run these programs in memory rather than running all of them on disk. You can run them from memory itself. The previous version with Hadoop 1.x, the drawback was that whenever you had to do an intermediate write, you would have to write that data on the disk, and then the data would be retrieved from the disk. Now, of course, this would require a disk input output utilization, and that's why prior to Hadoop 1.x, MapReduce was a slow thing. But now you had in-memory calculations which is done. No need to write the intermediate results on the disk. You have partitioners as well, which determine the best partitions to write your data, define how keys are assigned to your reducers. If you have all your data in one partition, it's really easy to retrieve that data. So all as and when more improvisations are being added to MapReduce, we are adding more, the community is adding more features to it. You have MapReduce interface, which is responsible for data processing in this map phase and responsible for data aggregation. Key value pairs, you do the map interface, which I just showed you. This is dot map phase and this is dot reduce phase, and then you get the final values out of it. This is under the hoods. That's how it basically works for you. Java is compatible, but if you are comfortable with any other programming languages, please go around and use that as well. This is how your MapReduce in action works. This is a Java application. Which countries are more prone to certain type of infectious diseases? Probably we want to do some analysis on this type of a data. This is my Hadoop cluster. Client will submit the job to the name node. The data would be on HDFS storage. This is your data, and these are your data nodes which are working. So we'll write a program in Python probably to do the mapping. So in our case, key would become, this countries would become the key for us, because we want to find out which countries are more prone to certain type of infectious diseases. So my analysis is on countries basis. So key would become this, and the diseases for this would probably become my count or something. I'll go around and create a business logic like that, and we'll write a MapReduce program, do the analysis, and return back the response to the client back. We just saw what's an overview of Hadoop, what was the architecture of MapReduce, differences, few differences. 1.x was not completely in memory. Hadoop 2.x is in memory. Let's quickly do a knowledge check. Now select two advantages of Hadoop 2.x over 1.x. What do you think? Okay, I'll take that question, Ganesh. That's a nice question you have. So Ganesh has a question. Could you please explain the difference between Hadoop and data warehouses? Is data warehouse support only structured data? If yes, what about cloud data warehouses like Snowflake? Can we say Hadoop is a data lake? All right, so Ganesh, to answer that question of yours, Hadoop, first of all, supports structured, unstructured, semi-structured data processing. You can process any type of data by the use of Hadoop. Absolutely right. Data warehouses only support structured data out there. Right. Now, for your semi-structured data like JSON, your JSON data could be converted over to a structured data very seamlessly, right? You have a lot of mappers which are available. Your JSON and XML could be converted. Your semi-structured and conversion to structured data is very seamless, and that's why you have cloud data warehouses like Snowflake and all these. They go around and support your JSON and XML formats as well, could be stored in your data warehouses. You have cloud data warehouses like Redshift is also a cloud data warehouse, which we have at Amazon. Hadoop is not a data lake. Data lake is basically a combination of your storage plus processing. Hadoop is a processing framework, right? Storage could be anything. So I could store the data on S3. So S3 would be considered as a data lake out here, or any other storage of yours where you are combinedly storing your structured, semi-structured, or unstructured data. Hadoop is used to query your data which you have stored on a data lake. I hope that answers your question. All right, so select two advantages of Hadoop 2.x over 1.x, inclusion of yarn and fast recovery from name node failure due to a standby name node are the major two advantages of Hadoop 2.x. Now place the MapReduce phase in their proper order. So which phase would come first, which phase would come last? Output would of course come last for us. So if I do the shuffling, first of all the input, then the split, then the map, then shuffle, then reduce, and then your output. That's typically how a MapReduce would work for us. Disha, if you could share some articles for us. I guess we do have on our docs. Okay, you have already shared that. Thank you. Which map reduce join is generally faster? That's actually a map side join is more faster over your reduced side join. When you are doing the mapping phase, at that point of time, if you do the join, that's generally more faster. All right, so let's take a look at our next module, which is Hive and Pig. Okay, Raja Ram has a question. How is AWS EMR related or different from Spark? Okay, so Rajaram, EMR is the Hadoop's implementation on AWS. It's called as EMR. EMR is a cluster on which you can deploy your Hadoop components. Spark is one of the components which runs with Hadoop. Now, although to run Spark, you do not mandatorily require Hadoop. You could run Spark in a standalone mode as well. You are good to run Spark as long as you have a distributed file system. So you can imagine Spark runs on top of AWS EMR, Amazon EMR that is. Spark runs on top of Amazon EMR. I hope that answers your question. All right, so let's take a look at Hive and Pig. We'll try to give you an overview, comparison with RDBMS architecture and data organization with Hive. Hive, what is it? It's a data warehousing solution. It uses MapReduce and HDFS and provides you a SQL compatible language, which we call as HQL, HiveQL. The name of that is actually HiveQL, we call it as. Why is it used? It's used for report generation, easy summarization, analysis of large volumes of data, and used for ad hoc querying as well. Good thing is that it leverages your SQL skills, manages your structured and unstructured data both. So Hadoop with Hive and RDBMS, it's built for different purpose and have their own pros and cons, guys. Hive versus relational database management system. Hive is not an alternative for your relational database management systems. Hive is a data warehouse and it's an open source data warehouse. So Hive versus relational databases, if you want to have a comparison, petabytes of unstructured, semi-structured and structured data I could store with Hive. With relational databases, only terabytes, and that too only structured data could be stored. Supports higher latencies, supports both high and low latency queries. Open source, flexible, fast, and it's still scaling. Hive is still scaling up. It's more appropriate for your defined constraints. Architecture is distributed for Hive because it runs with Hadoop. Relational database is more of client server architecture you have. Schema on read, schema on write for relational databases. Hive is more cost efficient. It could be more costly for you to scale a relational database. What are the components of Hive? So we get a web UI or a CLI, you get ODBC, JDBC connectors, JDBC and ODBC connectors for your Microsoft workloads or for your Linux-based workloads, MySQL, Postgre, any other Oracle databases and so on. You can use JDBC. For Microsoft SQL, you can use the ODBC connectors. You get drivers for it where you have compiler, optimizer, and executor for your queries. MapReduce and Hadoop clusters would of course be the base on top of which your Hive would be running. You can execute the tasks, interact with underlying Hadoop instances. You have a metadata store as well, who is responsible for storing all the information like how much tables, what are the columns, how much rows are there in your database, what are the columns and what are the type of the data types of a column, and all that thing is stored in your Metastore. Then you have a thrift server as well, which is basically responsible to detect any kind of your deviations or thrifts in your Hive servers. HiveQL statements is sent to the driver. Compiler is invoked by the driver. Compiler translates the statement into DAGs. DAG is called as your directed acyclic graph. Directed acyclic graph. Sorry, that's C, acyclic graph. Now, most likely all your big data programming analysis and big data processing frameworks, under the hoods, they create a DAG. Disha, if you could share blog post on DAG we have on blogs.amazon AWS. Just find one for DAG and you can share that with the participants. They'll get an overview about DAG, but it's an acyclic graph, which means that your flow of data is in one cycle, right? It doesn't loop back. It's not a cyclic graph. So once the output is there, you don't go around and circle back that output to the input. That's an DAGs are a more optimized way. Spark also uses DAG, Hive uses DAG, Pig also uses under the hoods, it uses DAG for your query compilations, and driver submits your job to the execution engine. Then that's typically what the job of that driver is. Hive interacts with your CLI. Most common ways to interact with your Hive is either through CLI. You also have other mechanisms are also available to interact with Hive, like we have a Spark, we have Hue, which is Hadoop user experience is available, which is a graphical way to interact with Hive, but most likely you interact with Hive by the use of CLI commands. That's how we run a query. This is the Hive shell. So you are, when you are at the Hive prompt, Hive home or whatever prompt you have created up, that's when you are giving your queries onto your Hive data warehouse. Thank you, Dishath. Right. So architecture of Hive, you have database, tables, partitions, and a bucket. A bucket is a file in a table directory, separates the table data into more manageable parts for us, avoids benefits of having a bucket is it basically avoids you having to create thousands of your tiny partitions. So I would highly recommend you to look out for two things: partitioning and bucketing. Bucketing is one level below partitioning. So first of all, you do partitioning, and then under partitioning, we do bucketing. Tables are your logical concepts consisting of your files in HDFS, basically. How do we organize the data in Hive? Data must be used by multiple tables that's internally managed. In HDFS, you can also store the data outside of Hive on your external storages, but data in that case must be used by multiple databases. Multiple schema for the same underlying data would be there in case of your external storages. Data does not get deleted when a table is deleted. You can create something called as external tables. External tables with Hive could be created up. I could create views in Hive. As a subset of your tables, you could create views. Then we can create indexes as well for faster querying of the data. It acts as a reference to your record, just like we have indexes in our dictionary. Indexes are exploited for faster querying, and these are one of the best ways which we still know to retrieve the data from the databases. Then we have the Hive Metastore. This guy is responsible for having a central repository for partition, schemas, tables, locations, column, and those column types, and so on. This is all what is your Hive Metastore is all about. The next thing what we have to understand is Pig. Let's quickly take an overview and an architecture of Pig. What is Pig? It's a scripting language. Pig is basically a scripting language for analyzing your large data sets. You would have to learn a new language. It's not SQL compatible, remember. It's an open source, high level programming environment used by programmers and data scientists and researchers. It's good for those who are familiar with SQL and a scripting language. You are comfortable with Python scripts or JavaScript, you should feel right at home, but you will have to learn a new syntax. It simplifies. Generally, you will use Pig when you have to do ETL, extract, transform, and load. The benefits of using Pig are it's designed to be easily controlled and modified by the users. It's data agnostic, it's more flexible, and it's quite fast as well. It's data agnostic, right? So Pig can operate on data and metadata. It can operate on data that is relational, nested, or unstructured. Nested data you will most likely find in case of nested JSON type of data. Then it's more flexible as well. Pig is intended to be a language for your parallel data processing. It is not tied to one particular parallel framework. And it was first implemented on Hadoop. It's quite flexible. I generally use Pig when specifically I have to extract data from a OLTP database, do some cleansing on the data, generally to join multiple fields to get rid of some outliers, get rid of some rows, and then to load the data seamlessly into a data warehouse. That's generally when I use Pig ETL scripts. It's very fast. Pig processes data quite quickly, can store data at any point of time. You have the revert back facilities with Pig as well. It's essentially a nice way to to work with Pig. You would have a Pig compiler. You submit your Pig script onto your cluster. Right? You will have the Pig compiler, which compiles your jobs into a machine readable format, and then you have your data stored on whichever HDFS or wherever. Do the transformations on your data and store the data on any other stable storage, or you can output the data directly here as well, wherever you want. But majority of the times you will see use case of this in pipelining the data, which means we are doing ETL here. Another use case is application that needs debugging on a regular basis is a use case for Pig. When developers does not know Java and you have to learn some new things from the beginning, that's also when you can use this programming language. And rapid development and testing and interactive data processing are some other use cases for Pig. The actual name for the language is called as your Pig Latin. You could create your user-defined functions and many things basically you can go around and do in this Pig by the use of your Pig Latin. Right? So you can do joins and all those things as well with your Pig Latin. Let's come over to our last module, last discussions which we'll have would be around AWS and big data. And let's try to see what type of services does AWS provide to you. These services which we talked about, these frameworks, Hive and Pig, what we talked about, they are just two of the frameworks used for big data processing. And believe me, folks, there are huge number of frameworks available out there. Right? You would have Jupyter notebooks, you have Tez, and you have Spark, and you have Oozie, and you have Storm, and you have HBase, and there's a gamut full of tools which are available, and all of them are open sources, and they integrate very well with Hadoop. Right? All right, so let's talk about big data ecosystem and use cases. Why AWS is a natural fit for big data, benefits of big data on AWS, and some tools and the ecosystem we'll talk about here. Now, AWS is a natural fit for big data because we handle a lot of big data use cases. We have customers who have a lot of their big data workloads running. They have huge amount of data. We have multiple parallel clusters running, a lot of EMR clusters. We have a lot of organizations and our customers who run their big data workloads on AWS. AWS Cloud, it's massive, virtually unlimited storage capacities. We provide you on-demand infrastructure, very flexible and very fine granular controls. You get cost effectiveness as well, and a lot of tools for managing structured and unstructured and your streaming data. What are the benefits of using AWS for big data? Your data is immediately available, broad and deep capabilities, trusted and secure, and hundreds of partners and solutions. You get over 50 services and hundreds of features to support your big data workloads. If you are concerned about security, AWS is ISO compliant and PCI DSS and CSM and Department of Defense and your FedRAMP compliant and whatnot. And then hundreds of partners and solutions are running their workloads on AWS. Get a help from consulting partners. We have a lot of third-party solution provider partners are there. And this is an overview of the big data ecosystem which we have. To collect the data, we have real-time solutions like Kinesis is there. For your big data, for data import, we have import, export, and Snowball, object storage, S3, and real-time. We have Kinesis data streams, relational databases, DynamoDB, IoT, Elasticsearch, machine learning. This is our data warehouse, which is Redshift, Lambda serverless processing, Hadoop is deployed on EMR and whatnot. Visualizations, we have QuickSight. This is a bunch of AWS services which you can use to create an entire big data architecture of yours. You can load massive volumes of your streaming data in AWS in near real time or in real time, and then can create your dashboards, and visualizations could be done seamlessly. For import export, right, you can use AWS import export. Snowball is there to avoid high network cost. We can ship to you some 16-wheeler trucks, and we can ship you high storage devices which you can connect into your data centers and get transfer speeds of up to 1 terabytes per second. Put your data on that truck and ship it back to AWS. We'll load it for you on S3. S3, most of you would be aware about S3 probably. It's a unlimited storage, object storage available to us. Kinesis is for capturing your real-time data. Streaming data capturing is done by Kinesis Streams. DynamoDB is NoSQL database. RDS, relational databases, you have 6 flavors of this. You get Oracle, you get Aurora, you get MySQL, Postgre, and you have 6 engines on which you can create your relational databases. EMR is Hadoop's implementation. EMR is a fully managed Hadoop framework. You can literally deploy a Hadoop cluster within few minutes on AWS by the use of EMR. You can run popular frameworks like Spark and Tez and Presto and so on. All right, so Ganesh, I'll take that question. Can transactional data be directly stored in Hadoop instead of OLTP database? Ganesh, you can do that, but I don't see a use case for doing that because your Hadoop will not support ACID compliances. A Hadoop is only an underlying storage. You would require some kind of a stable storage, a relational database to support your ACID compliances. Otherwise, you are just storing your data as an item, as one file. You will be storing your data on EBS volumes, so which will not support ACID compliances for you. Indeed, you could do that. You could write an application to store your data on HDFS. Nobody will stop you from doing that. Right? That's your transactional data. You could do so, but that doesn't serve the purpose. Right? It's just not the right way of doing things. Which is faster, S3, EBS, or EFS? So the fastest would be EBS, then your EFS, and then S3. If you are concerned about the latencies, that's how EBS is your storage area network. EFS is more of your network attached storages, and S3 would be your object storages, which is traversable over the internet. So EBS, EFS, and then S3. All right, so let's come forward. Lambda, folks, just read about Lambda is our serverless architectures. Disha will share a link with you for Lambda. Redshift is our data warehouse, and it's a cost-effective data warehouse as well. You can get started with just $1,000 per terabyte per year, which is actually very, very cost-effective. If you take a look at massive data warehouses, they tend to get very costly. Then you have Amazon Machine Learning is there, where you can run complex algorithms, for creating your ML models. AWS IoT is there, and we have Elasticsearch service, which is a for log analytics. It supports your Elk Stack, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana Stack is supported with Elk. QuickSight is a visualization tool, and so on. So what kind of tools can I use with AWS? You can use tools for collecting your data, for storing, for processing and analyzing and visualize. These are non-AWS tools as well, which you can use. You can integrate AWS with SAS, Qlik, Looker, Float, Tableau. Hadoop is, of course, we have EMR for that. Spark we can run, Oozie we can run on EMR. For storing your data, you can create Kafka clusters. We now support a service called as MSK is there. At Amazon managed Kafka is there. So you can literally deploy your Kafka clusters as well on AWS by the use of MSK. And HBase is a NoSQL database then. We do have a marketplace where you will find a lot of third-party and our partner solutions are there. Like you want integration with Splunk and Simachi and Clarity, TIBCO, Attunity for advanced analytics, SAS and BigML, Latigio and Zimentis and so on. For BI, you have TIBCO, Spotfire and Tableau. You'll find all those integrations very seamlessly. Your use cases could be around on-demand analytics and data warehousing. AWS supports all these type of workloads. Let's take a look at on-demand analysis, how that's done. So this is a architecture where we are getting the sales order inventory from the production systems from multiple online physical stores, physical locations. Your data is uploaded into S3 for staging, and a real-time data is loaded into Kinesis for further processing. This is where EMR is pulling the data from S3, and we are using these instances to sort, aggregate, and join the data sets. Then when your data is cleaned on EMR, we are putting the data onto Redshift, which is our data warehouse. EMR integrates with Redshift, and then you are further using EMR as the data source for your BI reports, for creating your charts and everything. On this side of real-time streaming side of things, we are putting the data into DynamoDB for fast processing, and then we are pushing that information. Updated information is immediately available online to the business users and customers. We are any kind of your anomalies detected out here, we could intimate the users in real time. There is a service which you can use here called as Kinesis Analytics for doing that in between. This architecture is also called as a Lambda architecture. Now, folks, don't confuse with AWS Lambda and this Lambda architecture. Lambda architecture is a big data architecture, which I'm talking about. There are multiple big data architectures. There is a Lambda architectures. There is a Kappa architecture as well. And you will find, Disha, if you could share, there's a link on our docs.aws about Lambda and Kappa architectures. If you could share that with participants. And this is a data warehousing use case where your data is stored on S3. Upload data from multiple sources into S3. EMR does your extract, transform, and load. Then we store the data again into S3. From S3, we run a copy command to copy the data onto Redshift. And from Redshift, you do your visualizations. This is how this is your data warehousing solution. This is again a clickstream analysis use case, where wherever the customer is clicking on while they are doing an online browsing, we are capturing that on Kinesis streams. And then these custom applications are built. We are building that custom applications for doing any kind of preference checking, what the customer clicks and so on. We are running them on Kinesis client library to make real-time recommendations for them. You might have seen sometimes when you are browsing, you see some advertisements based upon your preferences. How do you get that? It's basically through ML models. And then readers see their personalized content suggestions in real time. This is a use case where we are doing an ETL. Online orders are placed in DynamoDB. Then we are running Lambda. This is a service. This is a Lambda as a service, AWS service, which we have. That other thing which I was talking about was a Lambda architecture. Disha, I shared a link. Thank you, Disha. And then this is a serverless architecture which you can run your functions upon, and we are cleaning the data and then loading the data into Redshift and then to your QuickSight. These are some use cases, and AWS is a natural fit for big data, folks. We run thousands of, your big data workloads are running on AWS, and we support multiple use cases for multiple customers. And you will feel very comfortable running and using these services as well. S3 is a very scalable service. So what we talked about in this module was big data ecosystem, some use cases we talked about. Let's try to do a quick knowledge check. Which AWS products provides you a dynamically scaled, fully managed Hadoop framework, folks? All of you should be able to answer this. Yes, Sam, that so Apache Ranger is yes supported. Right. Privacera, I'm not sure. Right. Privacera, I don't think it's supported. Apache Ranger, we do go around and support on EMR. All right, let's answer this question, folks. Which one do you think? Absolutely right. People who are answering EMR, they're absolutely right here. Right, which AWS product which product provides visualization for business insights for you? All of you should be able to answer this as well. I guess we all know. Kinesis, no, Kinesis doesn't do visualization. Yes, that is QuickSight. Dr. Rajiv is absolutely right. That's your QuickSight, which does the visualization. So which AWS product provides data warehousing capabilities? I emphasized upon this multiple times. Which one does the data warehousing? Absolutely. That is Redshift does the data warehousing. And last one, which AWS product provides scalable object storage for data, big or small? This service is a flagship brand of AWS, and all of you should be knowing about this. When you start to learn AWS, the first thing we learn is this service. Yes, that is S3. And folks, that would be it from our side. Really want to thank you for being a patient listener, and we are just on time. It's 5:02. Now it's 5:03 now. So want to thank you all for attending this session and participating into our questions. I do hope you had some takeaways and some learnings within this 1.5 hours. The objective was to give you a very high level overview of what big data is. So I do hope few of your you have some amount of clarity now working and knowing what big data and what type of AWS services you can use for big data, what big data is, what Hadoop is, and how do you implement Hadoop in AWS. That's through EMR, and that was my objective for this 1.5 hour session with you guys. So want to wish you all the best for your journey on big data and AWS cloud, and take care of yourself, folks. Have a very nice weekend, and yep, do enjoy yourself. Thank you, everyone. Disha, you have something to add?
Yeah, sure, sir. Thank you so much. I think that was a wonderful session. Folks, I hope you all have enjoyed, and it was an ultimate takeaway from this session. And just wishing you all a very happy weekend, and ensure you keep practicing and learning as well. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Tariq, you might have to reach out to AWS support team for that. So Hitachi Pentaho, frankly, I have not created a use case like that, so I would not be able to comment upon it. You might need to reach to the AWS support team for that. We do have a certification on AWS data analytics. Thank you, folks. So we'll be closing the bridge now. Thank you very much.